So honestly, it's an honor to be standing here today. As Colin said, this is our first event that we've really hosted of this scale. And personally for me, ETHDenver was my first event that I ever went to last year. And it was quite meaningful because, you know, we work in Toronto and we're kind of just like in our own little bubble. And when we came here and people actually knew who we were, my mind was blown. And so I think it's very important, I think, to share some of the context behind what we're doing and how we do it, more than just what we're doing, and I'm going to try and do that for you here today. But I'll also tell you about our project Ethermint. So I'll start with telling you a little bit more about ChainSafe. So first and foremost, we are a community of kind and value-driven people who love each other very much. After all, we are Canadian, eh? I think this is really important. It's not just something I'm saying, because it comes through in every interaction we have, everything we do on a daily basis, and especially when we're solving hard problems. And I don't think we could do what we do if this wasn't true. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's also important to say that we love blockchain too. And so, in summary, we are a Toronto-based, remote-friendly blockchain research and development firm working on building the infrastructure for Web 3.0. We love solving hard problems, and over time, we've grown to become a blockchain and technology agnostic research and development firm. So some of our projects. Looking at this slide blows my mind. I mean, you know, last year this time, most of these projects were either in their infancy or did not exist at all. And so it's you know, I'm as surprised as anyone else at this, and I find it's a great privilege to work on these and to have the opportunity to not just focus on one network, but to learn about all of them, or many of them. So just a quick overview. You'll hear in depth about all of our major projects, which are on the screen. But we have a Polkadot implementation called Gossamer, written in Go. We have an Ethereum 2.0 implementation called Lodestar, written in TypeScript. I'm here to talk to you more about our work on Cosmos, which is around the Ethermint project. We also recently announced that we've been working on a Filecoin implementation as well in Rust called Forest. And we actually have two Ethereum Classic implementations that we maintain, both Geth Classic and Hyperledger Besu. And you will get to hear about all of these as the night goes on. I don't love talking about myself, but I think it's kind of important to give some context again. So I'm a technical PM at ChainSafe, and you might think working on all these, you know, protocol level projects that like I've been planning this for like my whole life, and like I followed this like really awesome path to get here. But the truth is that my journey was far from typical. In fact, like, you know, I was working in banks for like the last 7 years, yeah, honestly. You can say that again. But I was working on banks, at a bank for like almost 7 years, and actually just under 3 years ago, I got laid off. And that's precisely when I decided to take them down. I used that joke before, but it was too good not to do it again. But the reason I bring this up is because I was quite lost at that point. I didn't know what to do. Eventually I found the blockchain industry, going to meetups, and I realized, A, that the people were awesome, and their values were amazing, and they were working to kind of implement those values in technology. And, you know, eventually I met the folks at ChainSafe, and honestly they gave me a chance when not many other people would have. And I'm super grateful for that. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for that. And to be honest, most of the people at ChainSafe are very similar. Nobody was an expert when they started, and so it just goes to show that attitude goes a lot further than aptitude, especially at ChainSafe and especially in this industry. And the reason I share that is because a lot of you may not be fully in this industry yet, or you know, have a little bit of hesitation. But the truth is, you can have an impact. We need all the help we can get, and so please don't hesitate. And my story should be your inspiration. Now that my TED Talk is over, we can talk more about what we do. So, in terms of Ethermint, I'll take it a step back because I think it's very important to understand the context of this project more than what it actually is on a technical level. And so, I mean, obviously we're all here at ETHDenver, so we're very well aware of what Ethereum is a general purpose blockchain. But over the last few years, we've seen a move towards more application-specific blockchains, because obviously we've seen that Ethereum has some limitations. But there's definitely trade-offs, and I want to highlight a few of them right now. Obviously, the obvious, I guess, trade-off is complexity. It's quite easy to get started programming smart contracts without much prior knowledge. It's really hard to build a blockchain from scratch. But then, what you get when you put in the extra complexity is potential upgrades in performance, flexibility, and sovereignty. And I'll touch on those more as we go through this presentation, but I think it's important to understand that these two sort of paradigms when it comes to blockchains, and Ethermint is sort of an example of making those trade-offs. So talking about application-specific blockchains, as I was saying, building a blockchain from scratch is extremely hard. Networking, consensus, crypto, all these things, like you basically need to be an expert in all of them in order to build an application-specific blockchain, and obviously there's not many people or teams even who can do that. And so that's sort of why we haven't seen as many application-specific blockchains up until this point. The interesting thing is that these different things like networking, consensus, and crypto are often very similar across different blockchains. It's really the state transition function or the logic of the blockchain is what really makes each blockchain different. And so what we've seen in the last couple of years is some blockchain development frameworks popping up. And so there's a few I've highlighted here, Substrate and Gossamer. Gossamer is one of our projects, which can allow you to build blockchains that could be used with Polkadot. And I'm going to dive more into the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint Core, which is a blockchain development framework that allows you to build blockchains that can be used with Cosmos. So the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint. So this picture on the left or on your right kind of shows you the interaction between the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint. So essentially, Tendermint is the bottom two things there, which provides consensus and networking. And as I was saying on the last slide, these are very similar from blockchain to blockchain. So it makes sense to kind of build a package that can be reused so that you can focus on the state transition function. And what you can use Cosmos SDK to build that state transition function, and it's basically a modular application framework written in Go to build these application-specific blockchains. And if you look here at the Cosmos SDK little bar, essentially you can use different plugins, or what they call modules, that can be pre-built, or you can build your own, and you can combine these together to create your application-specific blockchain. So as you can see, it's a lot more straightforward to use something like the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint to build your application-specific blockchain than it is to have to build this all up from scratch. And like a good analogy is in the Web 2.0 world, we have frameworks to help you build web applications like React or Angular, and so using Cosmos SDK or Tendermint is like a very similar parallel in the blockchain world. The real question is, can we have the best of both worlds? There's a reason that Ethereum has developed the community it has, and there's a reason we're all here. And so application-specific blockchains seem great, but maybe there's things from general-purpose blockchains that we'd like to leverage. And also, all these amazing applications have already been built on Ethereum, and so it would be a shame to have to rebuild everything again, just because application-specific blockchains have some benefits. And so that's where Ethermint comes in. So if you haven't realized already, Ethermint is the baby of two words, Ethereum and Tendermint. So you get Ethermint. And essentially, what it is a Cosmos SDK module. So if we go back a couple slides, so it's one of these little orange things here. So it's a module. It's not a blockchain itself. And essentially, that module provides the functionality of the Ethereum virtual machine. And it's been written with the Cosmos SDK itself. And an important thing to realize is it includes the Web3 API. So basically, the way you would interact, or other applications that are not on the blockchain, interact with the state of Ethermint, so that existing dev tooling and frameworks can be used. So this makes it very easy to reuse things that already exist on Ethereum on Ethermint. And since it is a plugin or a module, you can compose an application using Ethermint and other modules that exist or ones that you write yourself. So why would you use it? So thinking back to some of the trade-offs. The first thing that's most important about Ethermint is the fact that you're able to use existing smart contracts and applications and tools that were built over the last 5 or 6 years for Ethereum, but also with added benefits. And so these added benefits can kind of be broken down into some of those trade-offs that I was talking about earlier. So one thing is performance, right? So Ethereum virtual machine, if you're using Ethereum and you're writing your smart contracts in Solidity, you're kind of confined to the performance of Solidity and Ethereum virtual machine. But if you're using the Cosmos SDK, which is written in Go, and Ethermint, which is written in Go, and you're adding in your own modules and functionality, you can start writing some of that functionality in Go. And so, the benefit to that too is that you don't have to do that all at once. You can port over your smart contracts, but then as you see fit, you can start building some of that functionality out in Go and transition iteratively over time, which just seems like a much better upgrade path than just having to rewrite everything at once. Another trade-off is flexibility. You're not really limited by the underlying architecture of Ethereum. So for example, there are a lot of crypto operations that are just not feasible on Ethereum because of the way it's set up. And if you want to use that on Ethereum, you just can't. And so using something like Ethermint and porting over your existing applications, you can start using, for example, crypto operations that might better suit your application. And I think the most important thing is sovereignty. So an important thing to realize is there's an application that has its own needs and its own desires and a community around that. And then you also have Ethereum, which has its own needs and its own desires. And so there's governance for the blockchain itself, and then there's governance for the application. And obviously, there's going to be conflicts between the two, because it's not going to be totally aligned. So when you have your own application-specific blockchain using something like Ethermint, the blockchain itself is the application. So the governance of this is a lot more aligned. And so what happens is, that your network can evolve in the direction that makes sense for that application versus being always sort of conflicting with the underlying platform. And it doesn't really need to be said, but I guess it's important to realize that also this is a proof-of-stake system and it's ready to go now. There's a lot of uncertainty around ETH 2.0. We're not sure exactly when it's going to be ready or what it's going to look like. This is ready now, it's been tested, you can use it. And so if proof of stake is something that would benefit your blockchain, then this is something you can start using today. And this has a fast block time and instant finality compared to Ethereum's 15-second block time and probabilistic finality. So just quickly touching on some of the challenges we had while building Ethermint. So one is conflicting architecture. So in Cosmos, Ethermint, as I was showing you earlier, is a module that's part of a larger system. So there's very well-defined interfaces and ways it needs to interact with the rest of the system. Whereas in Ethereum, the EVM was designed with the system in mind and everything is very tightly coupled. So, without going into too many details, if you want to understand more about that, I'm happy to chat it later. But this definitely posed a lot of challenges and probably most of the challenges. And then the other thing, which is kind of similar, but more on the API side, is that Ethereum was designed with this API in mind. And so when designing the EVM and that entire code base, they knew what kind of information they wanted to make available to the outside world and the interactions that they wanted to have. Whereas when the Cosmos SDK was designed, it was designed not with the EVM in mind. And so an example of that is filters in Ethereum are relatively simple, but implementing them in Ethermint is complex, and that's something we're actually working on now. And so yeah, stuff like this, which at first glance, you might think, oh, maybe you can just copy over all the code, but it's not that simple. So if you want to try Ethermint out, I highly recommend this video on the top. We'll post these slides after, or take a picture of this, but it's a 10-minute video that kind of takes you from not really knowing much about Ethermint to like getting started and deploying your first application. And then there's our repo and the Cosmos SDK documentation, which has everything you need to really get started. And I mean, we've talked a lot about Ethermint in theory, but it'd be cool to think about it in actual practice. And so I'll kind of take you back to when we were in Berlin in August for Berlin Blockchain Week. And we actually met with the Aragon team. They invited us over to their place for a barbecue, which was very nice of them. And they were really interested in our experience building Ethermint and also building Gossamer, which is Polkadot, because they were envisioning a multi-chain world in the future and they wanted to be prepared for that. And so in the end, what that resulted in actually is something called Aragon Chain. And we're actually working on that, and Colin will take you on that journey very shortly. And so you'll get to actually understand not just Ethermint, but how this is being used in the real world. And so that's about it for my presentation. Please stay in touch. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter, send me a message on Telegram, or email me. And yeah, we're happy to help however we can. So yeah, let's give it up for Colin now. So if anyone has one or two questions, we can quickly take those. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say like ready to go means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What does ready to go mean practically in this situation?
I mean, you can use Ethermint today to build an application, or I mean, if you have existing smart contracts or an application on Ethereum, you can start porting that over. Now, not all of the functionality has been replicated in Ethermint. For example, filters, which is like an important part of lots of applications on Ethereum right now, is something that's in development. But you can start using it, and most of the core functionality is there. Does that answer your question? Ish?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's there. It's ready. You can build an application with it. Anyone else? Yeah.
So in building these implementations, these multi-chain implementations, have you seen any performance differences between Polkadot and Cosmos? Maybe because of Go versus Rust or something like that?
Yeah. So both for Cosmos and for Polkadot, we're writing in Go, so there's no language difference there. It's hard to compare because Ethermint is like a very specific, it's not actually the base implementation, right? It's a module on top of Cosmos, so we can't really compare one-to-one.
But the final product, like the node that you build,
yeah.
do you see any performance sort of differences depending on which framework you're using?
So,
like
I mean,
in practical.
Yeah, I mean, for Ethermint, it isn't a node that we've built. It's just a module that you can use. But I mean, comparing our other projects, that's not something that we've directly compared, to be honest. But yeah, it's not really to be like it's not something that we've actually explored. But I don't know. Is there anyone else from our team who'd like to field that question?
I think let's chat about more after.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, Amer.